Manaria, meaning most beautiful. This is the intriguing love story of a multi-billionaire, resilient, proud young doctor, Tutor. He decided to spend his money on research in a rural kingdom a few weeks before his wedding. Events that hit him left his fate in the hands of a poor orphan who he must obey to survive. Please like, subscribe, and share.
Under the cover of darkness, Tutor and Manaria moved quietly along the bush paths, the only light guiding them a faint sliver of moonlight peeking through the dense canopy above. The jungle was alive with nocturnal sounds, crickets chirping, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the distant hoot of an owl. Tutor carried a small satchel with testing tools, while Manaria led the way, her intimate knowledge of the terrain ensuring they remained unseen. When they reached the reservoir, Tutor crouched behind a cluster of bushes and peered out. The water glistened faintly under the moonlight, but there was an unnatural stillness to it. Manaria pointed toward the edge of the reservoir, where several barrels were stacked haphazardly. "Those weren't here before," she whispered. Tutor nodded, his heart pounding. "Stay here. I'll get a closer look." "No," Manaria said firmly, her voice barely audible. "If they see you, they'll kill you. We go together." Tutor hesitated but relented, realizing there was no time to argue. They crept closer, their footsteps light and deliberate. When they reached the barrels, Tutor opened one and recoiled at the pungent chemical smell that wafted out. "It's the same substance," he whispered, his voice tight with anger. "Whoever is behind this is deliberately poisoning the water." Manaria's face was pale in the dim light. Why would someone do this? What could they possibly gain? Tutor didn't answer immediately, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the motive. On their way back, Tutor and Manaria took a different route to avoid detection. As they navigated the winding paths, they stumbled upon a clearing. Manaria stopped abruptly, motioning for Tutor to stay low. "What is it?" he whispered. She pointed ahead. In the clearing, several men worked under the light of torches. They were digging furiously into the earth, their tools clinking against rocks. A few armed guards stood watch, their rifles glinting ominously. Nearby, large sacks of unrefined gold were being loaded onto wooden carts. Tutor's breath caught in his throat. "They're mining gold," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Manaria's expression darkened. "Kabusa has been hiding this from the community. The elders would never have allowed it. They consider the land sacred." Tutor's mind raced as the realization hit him. "This is why he wants the elderly sick," he said, his voice rising slightly. "They're the ones who would resist him. With them out of the way, he can exploit the land for his own gain." Manaria placed a hand on his arm, urging him to stay quiet. "We need to leave before they notice us." Reluctantly, Tutor nodded, his fists clenched as they retreated into the shadows. Back at Manaria's hut, Tutor sat at the table, his head in his hands. The weight of what they had discovered pressed heavily on him. "I need to go back to the city," he said finally, breaking the silence. Manaria looked up from where she was stoking the fire. "To report this." "To report it, yes," Tutor said, meeting her gaze. "But also to plan my return. I need more resources, more people. This isn't just about the sickness anymore. It's about saving this community from being destroyed." Manaria's face was unreadable, but her hands trembled slightly. "And what about me?" she asked softly. Tutor crossed the room and knelt beside her. "I want you to come with me, Manaria. You've been my guide, my strength. I don't think I can do this without you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "This is my home, Tutor. I can't abandon it, not when so many people still need help." Tutor's heart ached at her words, but he understood. "Then I'll come back for you," he promised. "I won't leave you behind." As the night deepened, the tension between them softened. They shared a quiet meal, their conversations filled with soft laughter and shared memories of the past few days. Tutor found himself drawn to Manaria in ways he hadn't expected. "Manaria," he said suddenly, his voice low, "I've never met anyone like you. You're brave, kind, and selfless. I think I've fallen for you." Manaria looked at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Tutor, I don't know what to say." "Say you feel the same," he whispered, his hand reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. Manaria's lips quivered, and a single tear slid down her cheek. "I do," she said softly. "But our worlds are so different. How could this ever work?" "We'll make it work," Tutor said, his voice firm with conviction. "No matter what it takes, we'll find a way." Manaria leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. For the rest of the night they stayed close, clinging to each other as if the world outside didn't exist. The first light of dawn filtered through the thick trees as Tutor prepared to leave. The air was cool and heavy with the scents of the forest, but neither he nor Manaria paid attention to the beauty of the morning. Tutor's heart was weighed down with a mix of anticipation and sorrow. Manaria led him through the narrow bush paths, her steps hesitant. She pointed out landmarks he needed to remember. A twisted tree here, a cluster of boulders there. Each instruction was laced with an unspoken goodbye. At the edge of the wilderness, Manaria stopped. She turned to him, her face pale but resolute. "This path will take you to the main road," she said softly. "Once you're there, you'll be safe." Tutor reached into his bag and pulled out a small communication device. "I need you to have this," he said, pressing it into her hands. "It's linked to my phone. You can send me messages and I'll respond. I'll come back for you, Manaria. I promise." Her fingers lingered on the device as she looked up at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'll miss you," she whispered. "And I'll miss you," Tutor said, his voice thick with emotion. "But this isn't goodbye. It's just until next time." Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight embrace. They held each other for a long moment before Tutor finally stepped back, his heart heavy. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. Manaria watched until he disappeared into the distance, clutching the device as though it were a lifeline. Once Tutor reached the city, he wasted no time dropping a message for Manaria. "I am home now." He stared at the screen for a while, hoping for an immediate response, but none came. Back in her hut, Manaria received the message and read it over and over again. A small smile tugged at her lips, but it was fleeting. The silence of the hut enveloped her, the absence of Tutor's presence hitting her harder than she expected. Loneliness crept in like a shadow, wrapping itself around her heart. In the city, Tutor wasn't faring any better. He threw himself into his work and social obligations, but his thoughts constantly drifted back to Manaria. Her laughter, her courage, the way she had risked everything to help him, it all haunted him. He realized with startling clarity that he had left a part of himself behind in the wilderness with her. Days turned into a week, and Manaria began to feel unwell. It started as fatigue, then chills and fever took hold. She struggled to stay on her feet, her body betraying her will. In a moment of desperation, she clutched the communication device Tutor had given her and typed out a message. "I am very sick, Manaria." The message traveled across miles to Tutor's phone, but he didn't see it. His life in the city was a whirlwind of preparations for his upcoming wedding to Fiona. The wedding was just 10 days away, and Fiona was relentless in her demands for perfection. Tutor's mind was preoccupied. His phone left unattended for long stretches. 10 days to the wedding, Tutor stumbled upon the message while scrolling through his phone absent-mindedly. His heart skipped a beat as he read the words. "I am very sick, Manaria." He checked the timestamp and realized the message had been sent over a week ago. Panic surged through him. He quickly typed a reply. "My Manaria. How are you now?" For hours he stared at his phone, willing a response to come. None did. 2 days later, now just 2 days to his wedding, Tutor was a restless mess. Fiona noticed his distracted behavior and confronted him, but he brushed her off, citing work stress. His heart was consumed with worry for Manaria. When still no response came from her, he made a decision. With just 1 day left until his wedding, Tutor packed a bag and summoned his driver and personal guards. "I'm going back to Okofia," he told them, his voice brooking no argument. The drive to Okofia was tense and silent. Tutor sat in the back seat, his jaw clenched as he replayed worst-case scenarios in his mind. The thought of Manaria alone, sick, and possibly worse, gnawed at him. His guards, sensing his unease, stayed alert, scanning the road for any signs of trouble. The closer they got to the kingdom, the more treacherous the terrain became. Narrow paths replaced paved roads, and the dense forest loomed ominously around them. As they neared the outskirts of the kingdom, Tutor instructed the driver to stop. "We'll go the rest of the way on foot," he said. The guards protested, but Tutor was adamant. "We can't draw attention to ourselves. If Kabussa's men see us, it could be dangerous." Reluctantly they agreed. Tutor led the way, his heart pounding as he retraced the path Manaria had shown him. The journey through the bush was fraught with tension. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made Tutor's heart race. His guards flanked him, their hands on their weapons, ready for anything. When they reached the hidden cave where Tutor had stored his equipment, he was relieved to find it undisturbed. He checked the communication device he had left for Manaria but found no new messages. From there they made their way to her hut. The closer they got, the more Tutor's anxiety grew. What if he was too late? What if Manaria? He shook the thought from his mind, refusing to entertain it. Finally, they reached the clearing where Manaria's hut stood. Tutor froze. His Tutor approached the hut cautiously, his heart pounding. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing an unsettling sight. The once tidy hut was now in disarray, with dust coating the surfaces, and the air was heavy with neglect. His eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of Manaria. But she wasn't there. "Manaria!" Tutor called, his voice trembling with desperation. His guards exchanged uneasy glances, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons. Then Tutor noticed it, the back door of the hut slightly ajar. Beyond it, a faint trail of footprints led into the bush. They were uneven, as if made by someone struggling to walk. "Over here," he said, his voice firm now. Without hesitation, he followed the trail, his guards close behind. The footprints led deeper into the forest, winding through the undergrowth. Tutor's heart sank further with every step. The trail ended abruptly at a small clearing, where he saw her. Manaria was lying on the ground, her body frail and trembling, her breathing faint. Her face was pale, her beauty overshadowed by the shadow of illness. "Oh, my Manaria!" Tutor screamed, rushing to her side. He knelt down, cradling her in his arms as tears streamed down his face. "What happened to you?" Her eyes fluttered open briefly, her lips moving as if to speak, but no words came. "Get her back to the hut now." Tutor barked at his guards. They carefully lifted her, carrying her back through the bush while Tutor held her hand tightly, whispering words of encouragement. Back at the hut, Tutor transformed the small space into a makeshift medical center. He worked tirelessly through the night, using the supplies he had stashed in the secret bunker. For fluids, medications, and his unrelenting will became Manaria's lifeline. He cleaned her wounds, checked her vitals, and monitored her every breath. Despite her weakened state, her body fought to survive, fueled by Tutor's determination. "Come on, Manaria. You've been through worse than this," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You have to fight." The hours crawled by, the night seeming endless. Tutor's hands trembled from exhaustion, but he refused to stop. His guards stood watch outside, ensuring no one disturbed his efforts. By morning, the color began to return to Manaria's cheeks. Her breathing steadied, and she stirred slightly. Tutor sank to his knees, overwhelmed with relief. As Manaria rested, Tutor decided to run a few tests to understand the cause of her illness. He retrieved his portable lab equipment from the bunker and got to work, his mind racing with possibilities. When the results came back, he stared at them in disbelief. Among the findings was a revelation that shook him to his core. Manaria was 2 weeks pregnant. He sat back, the implications washing over him like a tidal wave. Memories of their shared nights, their stolen moments of connection, flooded his mind. A mixture of joy and fear coursed through him. Manaria carried his child. Manaria opened her eyes to find Tutor sitting beside her, his hand gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. His expression was tender yet conflicted. "Manaria," he said softly, "you're going to be okay. I've got you." Her lips parted, and she managed a weak smile. "You came back," she whispered. "I told you I would," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't stay away. You're everything to me." Manaria's eyes glistened, but she was too weak to respond. Tutor held her hand, his grip firm, as if willing his strength into her. "We'll get through this," he promised. "All of us." The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the forest. The bush was quieter now, the usual rustling and chirping subdued. It was the perfect time to leave without attracting attention. Tutor and his guards carried Manaria carefully to the truck. He had already packed the supplies he needed, knowing they couldn't return to the hut. As they drove through the winding paths of the forest, Tutor kept glancing at Manaria, who rested against his shoulder. Her breathing was steady now, but he couldn't shake the memory of how close he had come to losing her. The journey was tense, every sound in the wilderness putting them on edge. But Tutor's resolve was unshakable. He wouldn't let anything happen to Manaria, or their unborn child. The city was in chaos. The lavish hall reserved for Tutor and Fiona's wedding stood eerily empty, its grand chandeliers casting forlorn glimmers onto the untouched banquet tables. Guests whispered in clusters, exchanging speculations. Fiona sat alone in the bridal suite, her pristine gown a stark contrast to her disheveled hair and tear-streaked makeup. "Tutor is missing," Chief Otis, Tutor's father, bellowed, pacing his mansion with frantic energy. Calls were being made to the police, hospitals, and close friends, but no one had seen or heard from him in over 24 hours. At Fiona's home, her parents exchanged sharp words, accusing Tutor's family of staging a scandal. "This is an embarrassment we won't recover from," Fiona's father roared. The confusion wasn't limited to family. At Tutor's hospital, staff scrambled to maintain order as rumors of his disappearance spread. His absence left a void that threatened to collapse the institution. The night deepened, and the city began to settle into uneasy silence. Then, at nearly midnight, the screech of tires broke the stillness outside Tutor's hospital. The guards on duty rushed toward the sound, their flashlights cutting through the dark to reveal Tutor's truck, caked in mud. The driver's door swung open, and Tutor stepped out, disheveled and exhausted. "Dr. Tutor," one of the guards exclaimed, his voice laced with shock and relief. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Tutor ignored him, hurrying to the passenger side. He opened the door and carefully helped Manaria out. She was weak but conscious, leaning heavily on him for support. "Get a stretcher," Tutor ordered, his tone sharp. "Now." The guards exchanged confused glances but obeyed, rushing to fetch help. Within minutes, a small team of nurses emerged, their initial excitement at seeing Tutor quickly replaced by confusion as they noticed Manaria. "Who is she?" one nurse whispered to another. "Get her into a private room," Tutor commanded, brushing past them as he carried Manaria through the hospital's main entrance. Word of Tutor's return spread like wildfire. Phones rang incessantly as staff informed both Tutor's family and Fiona's that he had been found. "Tutor is back," Fiona shrieked when she received the call. "Where is he? Why didn't he call me?" "He's at the hospital, Miss Fiona," the nurse replied nervously. "But he's with someone." "Someone?" Fiona's voice turned icy. "What do you mean, someone?" Back at the hospital, Chief Otis stormed in with a contingent of bodyguards. Spotting Tutor near the private wing, he marched over, his face a mask of fury. "Where in God's name have you been?" Otis demanded. "Do you have any idea the chaos you've caused? Your wedding." Tutor cut him off, his voice steady but cold. "Not now, Dad. I have a patient who needs immediate attention." "A patient?" Otis sputtered, his eyes narrowing as he caught sight of Manaria through the glass doors of the private room. "Who is she?" "Someone who needs my help," Tutor replied firmly, refusing to elaborate. Inside the private room, Tutor worked tirelessly, stabilizing Manaria's condition. His hands moved with practiced precision, but his mind was in turmoil. He could feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. His unexplained absence, the chaos at home, and now the presence of Manaria, who had unknowingly turned his life upside down. As he adjusted her fore-drip, Manaria's eyes fluttered open. She looked at him, her gaze soft but questioning. "You brought me here," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Of course I did," Tutor replied, his tone gentle. "I wasn't going to leave you behind." "But she hesitated, searching for the right words. "Your wedding." Tutor's chest tightened. He glanced away, unable to meet her eyes. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is that you're safe." Manaria didn't press further, her exhaustion overtaking her. Tutor sat by her bedside, his resolve hardening. Outside the room, tensions boiled. Fiona arrived at the hospital, her gown still trailing behind her. She stormed past the nurses, her eyes blazing with fury. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice echoing through the corridor. Chief Otis intercepted her. "He's in there," he said, pointing toward the private wing. "But he's refusing to explain anything." Fiona didn't wait for permission. She marched toward the room, but as she reached for the door handle, Tutor stepped out, closing the door firmly behind him. "Tutor!" Fiona hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "What is going on? Who is that woman?" Tutor's expression was unreadable. "Fiona, I'll explain everything. But not now." "Not now," she repeated, her voice rising. "You disappear on our wedding day, only to show up with her? Who is she, Tutor?" "It's complicated," he replied, his tone measured. "Please just trust me." "Trust you?" Fiona's laughter was cold and sharp. "You've made a fool of me, Tutor. Of all of us." Behind him, Manaria stirred, her faint voice calling his name. Fiona's eyes narrowed, her suspicion deepening. Tutor felt the walls closing in around him. The life he had meticulously built was crumbling, and he had no idea how to piece it back together. All he knew was that he couldn't let Manaria go. Not now, not ever. "Fiona, go home," he said finally, his voice firm. "We'll talk tomorrow." Fiona stared at him, her eyes brimming with tears of betrayal. "You're choosing her over me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Tutor didn't respond. He turned back to the room, closing the door behind him. Inside, he sat beside Manaria once more, his hand gently brushing against hers. "We'll get through this," he murmured, more to himself than to her. But deep down, he knew the storm was only beginning.